to A Plan for That podcast, where each week I will be meeting with organizers, leaders, and democracy warriors. And together we will educate, invigorate, and elevate the progressive movement. Together we will elect an army of progressives. Hey guys, it's Erin from Plan for That Pod, and I really need you guys. I know it's been a long weekend, and some of us have had some really wonderful experiences, and then some of us watched videos that Michael Flynn did. So yeah, maybe not so good. First and foremost, let me thank every single person who serves and has served in our military. I cannot thank the people who dedicate themselves to protecting our democracy enough. And honestly, I think the best way to honor them is to continue the battle to save democracy. And that is what I'm committed to doing. Welcome to A Plan for That. So the good, the bad, and the ugly is a little bit of a news segment that we're running, and it just kind of helps pare down the news cycle, which is a hurricane. Let's face it. So the good, there is some good news. Woohoo! So the Texas Democrats, if you didn't know already, stood up and walked out of their local legislature to stop a voter suppression legislation from being passed. And it actually worked. There's this thing called quorum, where you have to have a certain number of people in order to take a vote on something. And because they walked out, it failed. This is something that is so simple and so easy to do. I just don't understand why the Senate Democrats aren't doing it to, say, make the filibuster end, or to, say, get an insurrection select committee or special prosecutor, or to, say, enact voting rights. Senate Democrats, looking at you. Stand up and walk out, okay? I just need you to get a little tough. The next thing that I thought was good, and I'm going to make an equivalation here because it's not necessarily all good, but Biden did acknowledge as our president the Tulsa massacre. And to my knowledge, he's the first president who has really done that. Why is it good? Okay, it's good because without any acknowledgement, people like myself who did not get taught that in high school history, college history, etc., would not know what happened and what a horrible event that was, and why it is so incredibly important that we get rid of systemic racism and we make reparations for systemic racism. Now, here's why it's not as awesome as it could be. There was just an acknowledgement. There wasn't a huge conversation about it. There definitely isn't any legislation about it. And there was zero mentioning about reformations or reparations. So I'm going to wait and see what action is coming, because words are fancy, but they don't do anything without action. The next thing that was good, and all the way good, was that the House passed the Equality Act. That just happened today. So go Pride! I am super, super happy. And just in case you haven't followed the account, we are at Plan for That Pod, where I made a statement earlier today that love is love, equality is right, and no matter who you are, we love you and accept you exactly as you are. Be proud, stand proud. Happy Pride. So that was the good news. Unfortunately, that is going to be followed by some pretty awful stuff, guys. You know, with all of the news that we just discussed and the taste that it left in my mouth, I am very grateful to be sitting here with, at least virtually, Jennifer Cohn, who is an attorney, an election integrity advocate, a friend of the show, and a writer whose election integrity articles have appeared in the New York Review of Books, Who, What, Why, TYT Investigates, the Brad blog, and Salon. Since the 2016 election, she has focused her professional efforts exclusively on investigating and exposing our country's insecure computerized elections. She posts daily about election security, and that's how we met, via her Twitter account, which is at Jenny Cohn. That's COHN1. which has over 180,000 followers. She graduated from the University of California, Los Angeles, and Hastings College of Law. She was a law partner at Nielsen Haley Abbott in Marin County for many years, where she specialized in insurance coverage and civil appeals. And before that, she specialized in criminal appellate law. And honestly, that kind of background is exactly what we need right now. How are you doing tonight, Jennifer Cohn?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm a little stressed out. I don't know if you could tell by the tone of my voice or not.
Yeah.
I know you've been on the show before, and we were super, super lucky then, and we're even luckier now because I wish I could say that things have improved, but really they're not, are they?
Well, I mean, it would have been a lot worse if Trump were in the Oval Office right now. So I don't know if I think it's improved in that sense. We now have someone who isn't every day in the Oval Office causing outrage, but I think we're in a I don't know that we're much safer or any safer than we were before, as far as our long-term prognosis.
I just could not wait to get your take on what happened in Texas because on the one hand, and we talked about this in my news wrap up, on the one hand, I am just super, super proud and really excited about the fact that the Democrats in the Texas legislature stood up and just walked out and made it flat out impossible for the voter suppression bills to be signed into law. But then on the other hand, now the governor is like threatening to shut down his own government and not pay anyone. And what can you tell us, Jenny? Is there anything that can be done?
I don't know procedurally well enough to say in that sense, but I don't think it's ever wrong to take a moral stand. And I think that the Democrats haven't been loud enough about that in general. Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad to see them doing that in Texas, because even when you don't have leverage to enact or pass the certain laws that you want, that one of the ways you get leverage is to get your constituents on your side. And this is something that the GOP has understood and that the Democrats have not. And moral outrage motivates people, and it motivates, on the GOP side, I think it's often fake moral outrage. Their voters may feel that it's real, but it's often based on untruths. I think the Democrats have really missed the boat in not using legitimate moral outrage to gain traction for meaningful reforms on things like voting rights. And I also think, though, in general, the Democrats on messaging, and I don't want to just bash them. I mean, we're facing an existential threat that is the Republican Party, but they don't make enough use of things like talking points. Mm-hmm. So I don't even think to say voter suppression to me is not that helpful, because, I mean, some of the things, lumping it all together, there are certain things that even a Republican would have trouble justifying, like closing polling places in predominantly Black areas. That is very clear voter suppression. There are other things, and I think that should be specifically messaged when that is happening, rather than just mushing it all together, because there are other things like voter ID where you're just it's harder. There are going to be Republicans who just cannot and will not ever accept that it's not that you should be able to vote without an ID. And I kind of understand it to an extent. Where I object to voter ID is when it's a strict voter ID and a dash or a comma or, those types of things end up rejecting you at the polls. But I feel like talking points are so important, and the Democrats are starting to get better with like big messaging, big lie this and voter suppression that. But those things do not persuade, to the extent there are reasonable Republican voters, they don't persuade them at all.
Yeah.
Well, and even like independents, they're not persuasive to independents.
I hear you. I know we're actually, so I'm part of, and I know you've probably heard on previous shows about this, and if not, I'm announcing it now. I'm part of the United Progressive platform. And one of the things,
that's great.
Yes, it's super exciting. One of the things that we're trying to do over there is really pound messaging, and not the messaging that the Democrats have been trying to piece together for the last couple of decades, more messaging that comes directly out of the ASO who are actively working in local communities on what messages work and listening. And listening is so important because if you're not listening to the voters, how could you possibly know what kind of message that you need to deliver to them, right?
I think that's exactly right. But I assume and I hope that they're studying the sort of the psychology of messaging and marketing and advertising, because it all plays together in, the importance of repetition and clarity and again, things like talking points. But that's great. I'm glad that you guys are working on the messaging. That's what I've been starting to study lately, is the psychology of persuasion, because it can be used for evil, a la the GOP, or it can be used for good.
Right.
So I'm hoping to use it for good. I don't understand it well enough myself. I think the GOP has studied it very clearly for years through like the Leadership Institute. That's Morton Blackwell, and I don't think they are deploying it for good. I think they deploy it for bad, for evil.
Well, if when this show gets released and you listen to my news wrap up, wait till you hear about the ugly portion, which is basically Christo-fascism that's being pushed in a major way. It's terrifying. There's so many motives to the dark money coup, and it really doesn't just end with keeping Republicans in power and getting rid of elections and all of the things that are playing out in every dystopian television show that we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years. It's happening. Like, it's not time to just talk about the alarm. It's time to smash the glass, as it were. And one of the reasons that I really, really wanted to talk to you is about something to do with, we're citizenry, okay? Mm-hmm. Our votes are protected. Our constitutional right to vote is enshrined in the Constitution itself. It is a protected right. So what can you say about what's going on in Arizona with the fraud and we never, ever refer to it as anything other than that, where people's votes that have already been cast are being exposed, not just to Trump minions, but people who really are up to no good? What can you tell us?
I do want to talk about the fraud, but first I wanted to give you this great quote because I found
Please.
It the other day, and I just think it's fascinating on this sort of unreality and twisting mind manipulation that we're experiencing. It dates back really to the Bush-Rove administration. They've been doing it all along. And this is a quote that was in a New York Times piece by a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer and author. Here's the quote. "We are an empire now, and while you study us judiciously, mind you, we act again, and you can study that too, and that's how things will play out. We are history's actors, while the rest of you will just be left to study what we do."
Wow.
Actually, there was more to it, though, about how, guys like me, we're in what we call the reality-based community. Anyway, it talks all about how they, here we go. "We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality." There we go. "And while you study that reality judiciously, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too, and that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and all of you will be left just to study what we do." And everyone believes that was Karl Rove. He didn't identify the speaker. He said it was a senior aide to Bush. But everyone thinks it's Rove, and he certainly hasn't denied it. The author is Ron Suskind, who is on Twitter, by the way, at Ron Suskind. I just followed him. I'm hoping he'll follow me back, but so far, no go. So I think that the GOP has really put an emphasis on mind manipulation and creating their own reality, really for decades. And we are way, way, way behind on this issue. And the fraud is just the latest example of that, the fraud in Arizona. And why I'm so alarmed is because we're getting... At the threshold, even the Democrats are promoting a sort of a half-truth, which is the notion that race was already audited 3 times. And I mean, from what I know from people who study audits and are credible on that issue, what they're calling audits were not particularly robust or meaningful. So the official audits in the U.S. are kind of garbage for the most part. One of the things that they're calling one of their pre-election audits that was official is called logic and accuracy testing, and it's important. It's done before an election to make sure that voting equipment works as it's supposed to work, but it's not penetration testing. It's before the election. And most importantly, most hackers, if they were going to install malware, they would have it go into effect on election day, not have it so that it works before election day and can be detected during a logic and accuracy test. So logic and accuracy is not meant to discover election security problems. And then there was kind of an official audit, but it wasn't particularly large. And you're supposed to select the batches that you would check at random, and instead they pre-selected them so everyone knew which batches were not going to be audited. So that's not particularly meaningful.
No.
And what worries me is we're just getting so far down the rabbit hole of what's true and what isn't, because the Democrats who tried to get meaningful audits across the board and failed because the GOP blocked them, rather than respond to the big lie with that, saying, look, we asked to do audits for all of these races, and you said no, and now you're trying to change the rules of the game after the fact. I know that's not perfect, but instead of going with that, which at least would have been the truth, they went with, most secure election ever, rainbows and unicorns, and that digs us really deep in. So yeah, the fraud isn't particularly transparent, and they were doing things. It's cherry picked. These are not good faith actors. You have a party that blocked audits across the board that is now cherry picking them in the counties of their choice, and only one of America's top 2 vendors. They're ignoring the largest vendor, which historically had by far the most security problems, at least that had been discovered and reported in the media. So I don't know what to say. I mean, I think the audit is garbage, but even in some ways, if it weren't, I oppose it in the sense that a cherry-picked audit is never going to get us to the truth of the overall picture of the integrity of the election. We needed them across the board.
Exactly. And I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, in a prior episode, which will be out shortly before this, Chris Ferry and I were talking, and I felt like I was channeling you, I swear, because what I said was, if the goal was truth, okay, if the goal was to actually have faith in elections and for everyone to feel secure about our elections, then there wouldn't be all of this secrecy, all of this, who is this group? Where did they come from? Why are they associated with Trump? Why are they associated with the Koch empire? But the goal really isn't. The goal to me, looking out, as just your average schmo, the goal to me is to upend our country's faith in our elections completely. Like, end goal.
Well, but the truth is, we didn't really have a particularly trustworthy election system. And the reason why we didn't was because of the GOP. And so what they did is they weaponized really some of the problems that they purposely left in place. And then rather than call them out on that, the Democrats decided to pretend those problems didn't exist. And I just think that makes it worse in some ways, because sure, among Democrats that'll work. Democrats will believe that it's a big lie. But among the people who are maybe independent or, don't like either party, or are longtime election integrity advocates, that boat don't float, or whatever the expression is, it doesn't float, because
right.
It wasn't a particularly secure election. And we also had all of these devastating down ballot losses that were highly unexpected. The Democrats were expected to have a blue wave. Remember the blue wave that didn't occur? It was a puddle. It was a red wave instead, a red tsunami.
Yeah.
So I think they're trying to undermine it, but I think that the Democrats have really made a mistake, that thinking that maintaining trust in elections meant pretending that trustworthy elections were trustworthy. Mm-hmm. And so now I don't want to equate the two. Certainly the GOP to me is a much, much worse actor. But the Democrats have not countered this effectively and smartly, and even not really with integrity, frankly. And lately they're not. And yeah, it's really dangerous. Patrick Byrne is one of the people who's raised a lot of money for the fraud in Arizona. And he got, he got honeypotted by Maria Butina, the Russian spy.
It's like reading a novel, except the script doesn't even sound believable, and yet it's reality.
It's reality, but the most dangerous thing, the other thing I've been reading about with misinformation, is it's important for it to stick, to have a grain of truth. So the more we give them that grain of truth, the more we overstate the security of the election, and then you have the MAGAs discovering, oh my God, voting machines connect to the internet. So it really isn't that secure. That makes their it makes the GOP's misinformation the big lie. It makes it fly on their side because there are grains of truth to it. And I just think full transparency, we should have been doing this all along. And maybe it's too late now. I don't know. It's getting really, I don't know how, maybe the Democrats are going to come forward and propose manual audits across the board again for 2022. And they're just waiting for something, HR 1, which does not require manual audits, by the way. Maybe they're waiting for HR 1 to play out first. But I'm really, really worried because even Senator Wyden, who was the only one who really was taking the Republican Party to task and the vendors to task, on real election security concerns before the 2020 election, even he has gone completely silent on election security. And I don't know what's going on. And it has me very, very concerned because
I hear you.
If we lose the House and Senate in 2022, we're done. We're just done.
Yes. And not to pour oil on that fire, but we also have the same people who voted to overturn the election, who think that the election was a lie and who think that Trump should really be the president, i.e. nut jobs, running for not just regular public office like, comptroller or whatever. They're running for Secretary of State. Right. That means they're running to overturn the next election.
I think that's right. Yeah, it's very dangerous, but it's always been very dangerous. And I want to say something. It has always been very dangerous as far as domestic actors. Russia, I think, also looks for real vulnerabilities and then weaponizes them. That's what it does to undermine, struggling democracies, real democracies. No democracy is perfect. And so it looks for the holes and then it exploits them. And it saw that our election system was kind of crappy. And, it's exploited that to great effect. But the truth is it's always been vulnerable, in particular to domestic actors. And now, I don't know, it's another thing that's really weird is before the 2020 election, the Democrats, if you'll remember, were sounding the alarm about Russia again and our election system. And suddenly it's as if that never happened. And it wasn't just about misinformation before the election. There was a huge New York Times piece that said they were inside the systems again. Yeah. And including, and that they had, the last line of the article, and it was by a very interesting New York Times journalist. Oh God, I forgot his name. But the last line of the article was that their ability to Russia's ability to change vote tallies is limited, as in they can do it. I mean, as in,
right.
What the hell? And now suddenly we're pretending that wasn't a thing. Something is we are not getting the full picture as American citizens, and we've never been given the full picture. And I think the full picture is getting probably darker and cloudier and scarier the more we don't get to the truth.
I would agree with you. And I really want you to kind of, see, I follow you incessantly and everybody knows that. But for those who have not yet found you, I really want you to piece together who is behind the machines companies, because that in of itself was a 4-alarm fire for me. I remember just on one random weekend, you and I were going back and forth like a house on fire on that one. Spoiler alert, it's really disturbing. So I'm going to shut up now and let you paint that picture so that our listeners understand.
Sure. I do want to preface it that here is what I think distinguishes people with legitimate concerns. Well, there's many things. People with legitimate concerns with those who take it too far. Mm-hmm. And I have always said that it's taking it too far when you say things like partisan associations prove fraud. They do not prove fraud. They prove that we have cause for concern, mm-hmm. Reasonable cause for concern, but they don't prove fraud. And that's, I think, a big distinction between legitimate election integrity advocates and fake ones.
Sure.
So, and even ones who are well-intended but take it too far. And I've always called that out on the left, and I call it out on the right. I call it out on both sides. So with that said, the partisan associations are very concerning. We were told after 2016 that America's election system was too decentralized to allow an outcome-altering attack. And even before you get into the partisan associations, that's a load of crap because we have the Electoral College and we have swing states, and it only would take a number of counties in swing states to change an outcome. And the way our election voting machines work is they receive programming from centralized computers, usually at the county or at the vendor itself. And so if you were to hack one of those centralized computers, you get the entire county, all of the voting machines in the county. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to go to each individual voting machine. That's just a lie. So it's never been too decentralized to allow an outcome altering attack. That was hogwash. And even some of the people who said that have since admitted that it was hogwash. So Jay Johnson, who was in the Obama administration, he wrote a letter after just before the 2016 election, where he and Jim Clapper said that our election system was too decentralized, to allow an outcome altering attack. And he later admitted that wasn't really true. But in another sense, it's not true, which is that we have just two vendors that account for more than 80% of U.S. election equipment. And the largest of the two, I think by far, although most of the studies of it show that they're close, but the largest is ES&S. The second largest is Dominion Voting, which is the one that the GOP is always screaming about. And then the third largest is Hart InterCivic. And then there's sort of a smattering that accounts for the remaining 10%. So ES&S is about 44% minimum. The Dominion is about 37% maximum, and then Hart is about 10%. And ES&S was founded by two brothers in the 1970s with money from a conservative family, the Amundsen family. They're multimillionaires. And the money actually came from a guy named, it's Robert and William Amundsen. They're conservative, they're Republicans. I believe that they are pro-life. When their cousin, so the whole Amundsen family has this family foundation. And their cousin, whose dad started the foundation, who was really the richest to begin with, he was super religious right, Council for National Policy.
Oh no.
Scary guy named Howard Amundsen. And he was one of the early members of the Council for National Policy. So that's kind of, and then ES&S's chairman was Chuck Hagel, who became a Republican senator from Nebraska, and he won in a unexpected landslide, like a 15-point landslide that was predicted to be neck and neck. It was predicted on the eve of the election to be literally tied, 47-47.
Wow.
And so he stepped down just from ES&S just a few days before running. And then his treasurer was a guy named Mike McCarthy, who owns the McCarthy Group, which currently owns ES&S. And I believe he's conservative also. Interestingly, I don't think either of them supported Trump. I believe they do support Republicans generally, but they may be never Trumpers, which I find fascinating. I'll let you, I don't know what to make of it. It's much nicer in some ways to be able to draw these clean lines, like they're all in for the GOP or they're all in for the Democrats. But no, Chuck Hagel actually campaigned for Joe Biden. So you get sort of disconcerting partisan connections going both conservative and liberal. But and then ES&S, so one of the two brothers went and joined Global Election Systems in the 1990s or early 2000s. And that was the company where as soon as he became president, so this is the Urosevich brothers, Bob Urosevich. As soon as he became president, they bought a company from a convicted embezzler whose crimes involved computer tampering.
Wow.
And they made him a senior VP in charge of programming.
Because he knew so well.
And the guy had served time. These were serious computer crimes, right?
God.
Yeah, and then an ATM manufacturer bought Global, and the president of the ATM manufacturer this was just before the 2004 election, a couple of years before, and he was a big Trump donor and supporter, and he sent out a fundraising letter where he said that something about how he was committed to delivering the state of Ohio to President Bush. This was before the 2004 election, which of course, I don't know that he probably wasn't admitting election fraud there. I don't know, but it obviously didn't go over well when it leaked to the press. And then you had the press, the New York Times did a study and found that the executives, I think all donated Republican, not Democrat. So they stopped making political donations. So then what happened was so that's Global and ES&S, and then Global became Diebold. So it's ES&S and Diebold. So ES&S at some point decided to buy Diebold.
Oh, wow.
And again, they were always related through these two brothers who had founded two brothers had founded ES&S. One brother went to Diebold. So they bought them. And then Chuck Schumer found out about it and asked the Department of Justice Antitrust Division to intervene because the combined company accounted for 70% of U.S. election equipment.
Right.
And so that's obviously not decentralized. And so the DOJ made them split up, and that's when Dominion, they were already in the U.S., but they were a small player. Mm-hmm. They bought some of Diebold's assets. But the truth is ES&S kept most of the contracts. Mm-hmm. That's where some of these studies that say ES&S 44, Dominion 37, I think are a little misleading because it's really a much heavier influence of ES&S if they kept all of the servicing and maintenance contracts. And they didn't keep all of them, but they kept most of them. So even though technically Diebold had the intellectual property rights, they didn't get the contracts. I think they bought them with the hope that they could lure away the customers, but most of them were not lured. A few probably were. So anyway, so that's Dominion voting. For a long time, I thought it was kind of clean. You have ES&S is red and Dominion is blue. And this was before everything blew up in 2020. And I even had a thread that was, what color is your vendor? It seemed kind of obvious to me those were the leanings. And I still tend to think those are the leanings, but it's not at all clean cut because, for example, in Georgia, the Secretary of State there is very much a Republican, and they chose Dominion. Mm-hmm. And certainly there are Democrats, like in Dallas, Texas, there is a Democrat there who chose ES&S and sat on ES&S's advisory board for a long time. Mm-hmm. And ES&S would, she was running for some rinky-dink position, and ES&S paid for T-shirts and campaign buttons for her. And she's a Democrat, Tony Pippin's pool. So it's not a clear demarcation. Mm-hmm. But overall, I do feel like it's still, that's kind of how I see it. And certainly that's how the Republican Party seems to see it. And there are those who, in the election integrity community, who say, no, I'm imagining it, that they're not going after ES&S. They really care about ES&S too. Hogwash. They haven't called for a forensic audit or an analysis of ES&S. They may behind the scenes say, yeah, all right, we understand that ES&S is a problem too, but they're not going after them.
No, they're not.
They're only going after Dominion.
Exactly.
And I've always been much more worried about ES&S just in terms of the media. They're the ones who had the internal modems installed in their precinct scanners that connected the scanners and the receiving end systems to the internet. Now, Dominion does sell modems too, I will say that, but they're not internal at least, so they're not connecting the actual voting equipment to the internet. Mm-hmm. ES&S is the one that lied about not having remote access software installed in its election management systems that aggregate all the precinct totals, and ES&S is the one that had the servicing and maintenance contracts where voting machines lost black votes in Georgia and Tennessee. And there've just been all this terrible stuff about ES&S, and the Republican Party just ignores them and only is talking about Dominion.
And there was so much of this, right? I mean, the news cycle, it's just a hurricane, so we probably don't remember altogether. But I remember because I was super excited for, I believe it was Thompson that was running in Kansas. And then, of course, Ossoff's first run. Thank God he's in the Senate now. And Jennifer, at like 11:45 at night, as the results are coming in and still being counted, et cetera, both of those races had a, quote, technical glitch. And
which two races? Are you talking about Ossoff in the special election?
No, this is a long time ago. This is back in 2018. His very first run, and he was ahead. And then there was
that was 2017. That was Georgia 6th district election.
Yes, you're right.
That was when Ossoff ran the first time. Yep. Yes, there was a glitch.
Yeah.
In Fulton County. And did the GOP expel the head of Fulton County back then? No. No, they were fine with that.
Right? And it's just the same thing happened in Kansas with Thompson. And that one is going back a little ways. I don't know if that was in
I don't remember that one.
2016 or 2017, James Thompson. But anyway, I was watching it, and he was ahead. He was the Democrat. He was ahead. And it was the same thing at like 11:30, 11:45 at night. I was watching it on MSNBC. And they said, there's apparently a problem with one of the precincts. We're going to have to get back to you. And then when they got back to us, he lost. It was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, well, and
yeah.
Yeah, and the Democrats, I think, have just been really naive to pretend that that's not worth investigating.
Right? Thank you.
Because, have been negligent. And Don Siegelman, he's the last Democratic governor of Alabama, and he's a friend of mine now. I've talked to him. I've read his book. I highly recommend it, Stealing Our Democracy.
Gonna be on my list.
He told me that he was well, he's the last Democratic governor Alabama has ever had, but he also he was governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and AG. He's the only politician who's held all of those positions in Alabama. And he said that when he was secretary of state, like a good old boy from the South, he asked him, he said, why is it that sometimes there's always a precinct or a county that comes in last? And he said, oh yeah, well, we wait to see how many votes we need to add.
Oh, that is, yeah.
It's real. I mean, it does happen. It's not really even a question of whether it happens. Of course it happens. Whether it can happen in a massive coordinated fashion is sort of the bigger question. And that's why things like secret remote access software is so concerning. And frankly, there should have been a big investigation of ES&S when that came out.
It's unbelievable.
And a detailed inquiry about past elections and where was this remote access. And that didn't happen. And I think that by pretending those things weren't a problem, the Democrats really set themselves up for the GOP to be able to play victim now. They should have been complaining about election integrity since 2000.
Yes. And so here, and it is James Thompson, by the way. I just looked it up, 2017.
I can't wait to look into that. I hadn't heard about that election.
Yeah, there was just, it was one of those that we thought for sure we would win because it was kind of flying under the radar of Ossoff's grand glory. He just is such an interesting and fascinating candidate that this guy was kind of eking by quietly.
Yeah.
But there was this quote last minute, technical glitch. And I didn't know you back then, but if I had, I would have been hair on fire. We need to audit this because it just sounds so fishy. And
it's so expensive. See, that's the other thing where we're just screwed because I mean, I would like someone to audit the main race and the North Carolina Senate races in particular. I know everyone talks about Kentucky and South Carolina, but as far as the polls, I would like those audited also. But I would start with Maine and North Carolina myself based on the polling. Mm-hmm. And
well, especially with
would be so expensive to do, and I'm not an auditor myself, so you'd have to hire someone who's trustworthy and. It's so expensive, but they have all this dark money funding coming in. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't doubt that some of it's coming from Russia. Russia loves this.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And how can, because the Democrats will not do it, the Democratic Party will not do it, how are the rest, what are Democratic voters supposed to do? No one is representing our interest on ensuring that some of these Democratic losses are legitimate.
See, and that's just
no one is.
Yeah,
it's terrible.
You hit the nail on the head. I mean, let's backtrack a little bit. So Susan Collins is now under investigation for some pretty shady sounding practices during her campaign, right? So I agree with you. I think that there needs to be a more nonpartisan approach and a robust audit as opposed to the fraudit that's occurring. But
no cherry picking. It should be across the board.
Exactly.
That should make everybody happy.
Exactly.
Your races, our wins would get audited, their wins would get audited. And the fact that the GOP is not calling for that tells me they're acting in bad faith.
Yep.
The fact that the Democrats are no longer calling for it has me completely freaked out. I don't know what is going on. It may very well be that they don't think they can say it now because they've been saying it was the most secure election ever. But that's weak. That's really lame. You just say, look, they're saying they want something more than what we've got. Okay, going forward, let's give more. Let's agree on what it is you want. And then if nothing else, it makes the GOP, it exposes their hypocrisy, right? That they don't really care about election integrity. Because I'll tell you, there are election integrity advocates who actually think that some of the frauditors really care about election integrity.
Oh.
And it drives me crazy. It's actually, Trump is such a divisive figure. He's divided the election integrity community quite badly as well.
Oh, that's not good news, Jen.
I think that would be a good litmus test. But the Democrats aren't proposing that either. So what is going on?
Well, here's what I've been told. And again, I'm just me. I'm not, somebody who works in the government or has any kind of top security clearance. But what I've been told by people in the know, whatever you want to take that to mean, is that there was such a problem with Trump going after Biden that they needed to squash any talk at all of any problems with any races. But I'm with you.
We needed to lie. We had to lie. We had no choice.
Yeah. See, I'm with you.
It was such.
Why not just say, hey, let's air out the laundry and see what really occurred, and then let the chips fall where they may. It just
Yeah. I mean, I get it. It's a tough situation, but I also, my criticism of them goes back even before the election because Wyden was the only one doing what you should do if you're fighting for the truth and to inform the public, grandstanding on the Senate floor, making videos, posting them to his Twitter account, all about the SAFE Act and election security and remote access and internet connectivity. He was the only one. They should have been on. Where was everybody else? Where was the Democratic leadership?
I agree.
Where were they? And had they done that, it would have been a lot harder for the GOP to get away with this victim.
I agree. And there's
bullshit that they're doing now.
There's so many things, too, that you and I have talked about previously, but just to give our audience a refresher, there are things called protected addresses where someone can place a vote, but you can't really track who that person is or where they live without a top security clearance. I mean, those are the kinds of things, not saying this did occur, but those are the kinds of things that are very easily manipulated without very much of a trail. I mean, if you were going to find...
I think there are different ways. There are different ways to do it. And I mean, we're just in such a bad position because frankly, even vote by mail, the chain of custody is it is very difficult to prove a transparent and secure chain of custody, even if it is secure. And I'm sure in the vast majority of cases it is. It's very difficult to prove because you think of it, the mail is coming in every day. Someone has to go pick it up. Ideally, they have two people go to do it, who are not politically aligned. Knowing whether everybody does that or doesn't do that is very difficult. So traditionally, election integrity advocates have actually been pretty wary of vote by mail, and that includes me. I am a little wary of it. However, when you have all these polling places being closed in urban areas, predominantly Democratic areas, predominantly African-American areas, you kind of need that. You need another way to get around the voter suppression. And so that may very well have been what kicked us over in the last election, was that instead of everyone going to the polls like Trump wanted them to, which, by the way, it's the precincts that had the wireless modems, not vote by mail to my knowledge. I don't think it did. But maybe that's what kicked it over. I don't know, but we're in just a really bad place because the Republican Party is either going to win in the next thing, in which case we're done, or they will lose and they will light the place on fire, and it will be difficult to prove that we really won with vote by mail.
So, and I'm with you, and I know our audience is as well. These are the things that mainstream media isn't talking about, and personally, I believe that's because they have an agenda that they're pushing, frankly. So now that we are talking with someone who is speaking truth, Jennifer, what can we do? What can we do as a citizenry?
I think we are going to have to start calling our elected representatives again. And I would almost pare it down. I think we maybe need a standalone manual audit bill. As much as I want hand-marked paper ballots, to an extent that ship has sailed, I don't know how much more election equipment there is to be bought. Either just call and ask for robust manual audits across the board for 2022. And Congress only has jurisdiction over federal races, but they do have jurisdiction over that. So ask for that. And then you can also advocate it at your... you can call your county election officials or state election office and say it too. And, right now, the most robust manual election audit that experts agree upon anyway is called a risk limiting audit. So, yeah, I would call and ask for that. And we've got to get it going. And I probably will start messaging that on my Twitter account. Yes. I really haven't yet. I think I'm going to soon. I'm going to try to get a better idea. For example, the SAFE Act was the best election security bill we had before 2022, and the GOP killed it. And that would have banned internet connectivity, and it would have required robust manual audits. It didn't quite go far enough on some things, but it's pretty good. So, you could also just say we want the SAFE Act again, election security bill.
The SAFE Act.
But I think we need actually a better bill than that, or even a pared down one. Something that everyone should agree at least on the auditing component, even if you love ballot marking devices, that's a whole other episode we can talk about another time, instead of hand-marked paper ballots. Even if you like a machine to mark your paper ballot for you, you should be able to agree that you want manual audits.
Well, see, and sometimes it's not even a nefarious thing. Like when I voted in the primary, everybody knows on the show that I voted for Elizabeth Warren, but at my location, and I mentioned this, it marked Michael Bloomberg. And I, at that point, grabbed one of the judges and said, I did not mark this. This is something that just automatically filled in, and you need to know about this. And the response was not encouraging. The response was just to leave the machine, continue to be used. And if I had been a judge, I would have shut it down. So, yeah.
They probably should. They usually wait to have a few people do it. So miscalibration is often what that is attributed to. And it can be done nefariously or non-nefariously. And most people sort of say, well, it's probably not nefarious. And it probably isn't. I don't know. Right. It's in some ways it would be a perfect crime if someone hypothetically wanted to do it, because no one would believe someone would just do it out in the open like that. But the truth is, as a voter, you can't prove that it was nefarious. And frankly, neither can most election officials, because the software is proprietary. So they could just have it happen on every 10th vote.
Exactly.
And some voters aren't going to notice.
Exactly.
It's just asking for trouble, I think, to have a touch screen mark your ballot for you. But, even the people who prefer that, the vote flipping, that is one thing, though, that is interesting. I used to like election integrity, among other reasons, because it actually was relatively nonpartisan.
Sure.
It's become very partisan now.
Oh, no.
But it used to be much more of a nonpartisan issue than it is now. And the miscalibration does happen both ways, surprisingly. So, for example, in the 2016 election in Pennsylvania, they actually were machines that were flipping to Clinton from Trump. Those were the reports anyway. But then there were also quite a few machines going the other way in two other states. I don't remember which two anymore, but I was just researching this. I hadn't even heard about that. And that's partly our media bubbles. We don't hear about it going the other direction. And I do think that miscalibration causes distrust for both parties, and that's touchscreen systems, whether they have a piece of paper or not. If you see a touchscreen flipping your vote, you're going to freak out, and it's going to undermine trust in elections. And why would you do that? What an unforced error. What a stupid thing to do. And yet about 20% of the country is doing that.
Exactly.
Choosing to do that instead of hand marking their ballots.
It boggles my mind. Although if we hearken back to the Bush-Gore race, that was paper, and that also had some issues. So it was different, though. That was in some ways a ballot marking device. That wasn't using a pen. It was using a punch card machine to mark your ballot, which is a form of ballot marking device. And so you had hanging chads, and it made it very difficult. If it wasn't completely perforated, the machines couldn't count it. And then what do you do? And then they would look at it, and they'd see two holes that looked like they were maybe partially punched. And interestingly, Dan Rather did an episode after that election with employees of Sequoia Voting, which is now part of Dominion Voting. Mm-hmm. They acquired it, but where they said that the management switched paper stock before the election, and that they knew that it was going to cause problems with the holes not dislodging. So, you can rig that too. You can rig punch hole machines. And so nobody's calling for punch hole machines. The hand marking actually works remarkably well. Mm-hmm. So I think we should go back to that myself. I agree with you. And so
pen and paper, I should say pen and paper is what I mean when I say hand marking.
Yes. And so when we're calling our electeds, at least me personally, first and foremost, I'm asking for an election security bill. I'm also asking for the insurrection to be fully investigated by a select committee. I, Jennifer, think that until we get to the bottom of what happened on January 6th, we are in trouble. I firmly believe that.
Well, I think we're in trouble because we never got to the bottom of 2016 either.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah, we never get to the bottom of it. And we never got to the bottom of 2004. We never get to the bottom of anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not doing that is just, it's allowed the wounds to our democracy to become infected and fester. And it's, yeah.
See, and it's things like what we talked about in the news wrap up with Michael Flynn just walking around breathing free air after literally suggesting a Myanmar violent coup in America. I'm so sick and tired of the non-accountability. Consequences don't exist. And then for other people, harsh consequences, years and years of prison. And it just, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And frankly, it seems like it makes democracy a little bit of a joke. How about you?
Yeah, I feel that way. I think we make a mistake by putting the same types of people into positions at the DOJ. And I saw a post from, I think it's Amy Siskind, who said, well, maybe I shouldn't attribute this to her. This would be my view anyway. I think she said this, that, if Merrick Garland isn't going to step up his game, they should put someone in there, maybe a woman of color, people who have stuff to actually lose. I feel in some ways, I don't want to be sexist toward men or anything, but women have been in many ways the biggest fighters in the resistance. And I think you have to go out on a little bit of a limb because to take out the GOP, which is going out far, far on a limb, if you're not willing to go out there and strike them down, then you got to step aside for someone who will.
Thank you.
Because we can't just, I'm sorry, I actually have to go.
No, that's okay.
My son needs my computer for his piano lesson.
That's okay. Your last point was fire as usual. I totally get it. No problem at all.
Great. So it's really great talking to you. My suggestion is for people to call their members of Congress and ask, to make it simple, just say ask to reintroduce the SAFE Act election security bill.
Absolutely. Here. I couldn't agree more. Let's go do it.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me on. It was great talking to you as always.
Thank you, Jenny. Likewise. It was so good to see you again. Jennifer.
Don't worry about it. Either one.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.